of the most notable cultural sites in Uptown Manhattan are the Apollo Theater, Columbia University, the Cotton Club, Hamilton Grange, and Fort Tryon. The Apollo Theater first opened in 1914 and was originally called Hertig and Seaman's New Burlesque Theater after Benjamin Hertig and Harry Seaman signed a 30-year lease on the newly constructed theater. The theater was first owned by Sidney Cohen and was designed by George Keister. When the theater opened in 1914, African Americans were not allowed to attend or perform, as was common at many theaters during the time. In 1933, Fiorello LaGuardia, a future New York City mayor, began a campaign against burlesque, and Hertig and Seaman's was closed. Cohen, the original owner, reopened the building and hired Morris Sussman as manager. Cohen and Sussman decided to focus their marketing attention on the growing African American community in Harlem and started producing variety reviews at the rebranded theater. The 125th Street Apollo Theater opened on January 26, 1934, with the show Jazz a la carte, which was headlined by Benny Carter and his orchestra, Ralph Copper, and Ada Ward. During the 1930s, the Apollo became known as the premier showplace in Harlem for live theatrical entertainment and hosted a variety of famous acts, including comedians like Dewey Pigmeat Markham and Dusty Fletcher, and tap dancers such as the Nicholas Brothers and Bill Bojangles Robinson. The Apollo Theater became the largest employer of black theatrical workers in 1937 and was the only theater in New York City that hired black workers in backstage positions. Ella Fitzgerald and Billie Holiday were among the iconic performers who gained traction and fame at the Apollo. During the 1940s, the Apollo catered to soldiers in World War II by setting aside 35 tickets daily for soldiers. Sammy Davis Jr. made his first Apollo appearance, and comics stopped using blackface makeup. Showtime at the Apollo was first broadcast in 1955 and was hosted by Willie Bryant and featured Sarah Vaughan, Big Joe Turner, Herb Jeffries, the Count Basie Orchestra, Nipsey Russell, and Bill Bailey. Also during the 1950s, the first dramatic play to be shown at the Apollo stage was performed by Sidney Poitier, and jazz, gospel, comedy, and mambo shows were among the most popular performances. In the 1960s, a variety of acts graced the stage at the Apollo, including the Isley Brothers, Jimi Hendrix, the Jewel Box Revue, Aretha Franklin, James Brown, Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, and Jimmy Witherspoon. During the 1970s, Aretha Franklin's shows were the big draw at the Apollo, with the marquee reading, "She's Home." John Lennon, Yoko Ono, and B.B. King appeared during the Apollo at the early 1970s for benefit concerts, but by the mid-1970s, only 22 weeks of shows were performed at the Apollo as recordings became the larger source of income for artists. The theater was closed by a reluctant Bobby Schiffman in January of 1976, but was briefly reopened under new management in 1978, with shows from Ralph McDonald, James Brown, and Bob Marley. In 1981, Percy Sutton's Inner City Broadcasting Corporation and a group of private investors purchased the Apollo Theater, and in 1983, the theater received state and city landmark status for being Harlem's oldest functioning theater. The theater was renovated and reopened in May of 1985 with a 50th anniversary television special called Motown Salutes the Apollo. Amateur Night was relaunched and Showtime at the Apollo was revived as a television show. During the 1990s, the Apollo Theater Foundation was founded as a nonprofit organization to manage, fund, and program the Apollo. Also during the 1990s, Prince performed an exclusive concert, Tony Bennett played a sold-out engagement to honor Billie Holiday, and the Apollo Theater Foundation launched its first performance series with a tribute to Dr. Martin Luther King and performances by the Alvin Ailey Dance Theater, Boys Choir of Harlem, and Betty Carter. The theater was renovated in the early 2000s and was host to memorials for James Brown and Michael Jackson and a campaign fundraiser for then Senator and Democratic presidential candidate Barack Obama. Today, the Apollo is still one of the premier performance venues in New York City and the world and hosts an estimated 1.3 million visitors each year. Columbia University is one of the oldest private institutions of higher learning in the United States. It was founded in 1754 and was originally called King's College. It reopened in 1784 after the American Revolution and was renamed Columbia College, becoming Columbia University in 1912. The university includes 3 undergraduate schools, and it is affiliated with Barnard University and the Columbia Teachers College. Barnard University was founded in 1889 and became affiliated with Columbia during the same year. It was named for Columbia's 10th president, Frederick Barnard, and today it is still an undergraduate liberal arts school for women. Modern-day students at Columbia and Barnard are able to take courses and use the cultural resources of both universities, and Barnard students receive degrees from both Barnard and Columbia upon graduation. Columbia University is an Ivy League school, and many of its programs are ranked among the highest in the country and the world, partly because of its location in Upper Manhattan. Encyclopedia Britannica notes, quote, "Shaped by the dynamic culture of New York City, Columbia has been less affected by tradition than other private Eastern universities of comparable age and esteem. From the onset, it differed from other colleges in its heavier emphasis on such subjects as commerce, government, and navigation. It has numerous strong graduate and professional schools, and various institutes for research and advanced study that have a cosmopolitan outlook. Its Teachers College, with the City for a Laboratory, is one of the best known in the nation, and the College of Physicians and Surgeons, together with the Presbyterian Hospital and allied institutions, forms the nucleus of one of the country's most renowned medical centers." End quote. Some of the most notable alumni from Columbia University include Barack Obama, Jack Kerouac, Joseph Campbell, Langston Hughes, and Uptown Sinclair. The Cotton Club was a nightclub in Harlem that featured prominent black performers who entertained white audiences. The club was first opened by Jack Johnson, the first African-American heavyweight boxing champion. Johnson opened the 400-seat nightclub in 1920 on the corner of 142nd and Lenox Avenue, calling it the Club Deluxe. In 1922, Owen Madden, a well-known figure in the Manhattan underworld, took over the club and renamed it the Cotton Club. The audience was limited to white patrons, and the interior was completely reworked to accommodate 700 seats, and a nightly review by a renowned chorus line. Radio broadcasts allowed the club to gain traction and notoriety. Jazz and blues were the most popular music genres performed at the club. Many iconic African-American performers graced the stage of the Cotton Club, but bandleader Duke Ellington was perhaps the most closely related to the venue. Ellington and his orchestra were hired in 1927 to be the house band at the club. Some of the, quote, jungle-style classics that Ellington and his band performed at the Cotton Club were reportedly inspired by the primitive decor of the club and included the Mood Indigo, Black and Tan Fantasy, Creole Love Call, and Rockin' and Rhythm. In 1931, Cab Calloway and his orchestra took over as the house band at the Cotton Club and also had a long and successful run. Appearances by other prominent entertainers such as Louis Armstrong, Ethel Waters, Lena Horne, and Bilbo Jangles Robinson also contributed to the success and fame of the Cotton Club. The height of the Cotton Club's success was from 1922 to 1935. After the Harlem Riots of 1935, the club moved to West 48th Street, but it was not able to retain its past success and closed in 1940. Since then, the Cotton Club name has been used on nightclubs around the world. A recreation of the original club opened in Harlem in 1978, and the story of the famous club was brought to new generations by films such as Francis Ford Coppola's The Cotton Club and Ken Burns' documentary Jazz. During the late 1700s, founding father Alexander Hamilton moved with his family to Harlem Heights in uptown Manhattan. In 1801, architect John McCobe Jr. was commissioned by Hamilton, the first Secretary of the U.S. Treasury, to design a federal-style country home for the Hamiltons' 32-acre estate. At the time, Harlem Heights was a rural area that provided a break from the mayhem and busyness of Midtown Manhattan and downtown Manhattan. The house was completed in 1802 and was called the Grange after the ancestral home of Hamilton's father in Scotland. Hamilton himself only lived at the Grange for just 2 years, from 1802 to 1804. In July of 1804, he was shot by Vice President Aaron Burr during a duel in Weehawken, New Jersey, and Hamilton died on July 12, 1804. During his time at the Grange, Hamilton and his wife entertained friends, colleagues, and national leaders in the house and the surrounding gardens. After Hamilton's death, his wife, Elizabeth Schuyler Hamilton, owned the house until 1833. St. Luke's Church acquired the Grange in 1889, and in the same year St. Luke's moved the entire house from West 43rd Street to West 41st Street and Covenant Avenue, where it was used as a temporary chapel. In 1924, the Grange was acquired by the American Scenic and Historical Preservation Society with the goal of making it into a historic site and museum, but nothing happened, and 4 decades later, in 1962, the house was acquired by the National Park Service. The Grange was named a National Memorial by Congress, and in 2008, the National Park Service moved the house to its third and final location at St. Nicholas Park in the Hamilton Heights neighborhood of Harlem. Today, the house is a museum where visitors can experience the first floor of the house just as it looked in the 1800s, when Hamilton and his family lived in the house, with the juxtaposition of the urban sprawl that now makes up Hamilton Heights. Fort Tryon is located alongside the Hudson Heights, Washington Heights, and Inwood neighborhoods in uptown Manhattan. The park features views of the Hudson River, 8 miles of walking paths, and the Met Cloisters, a branch of the Metropolitan Museum of Art that focuses on the art and architecture of medieval Europe. The Met Cloisters opened to the public in 1938, but was designed not to be a copy of any specific medieval structure, but rather an ensemble informed by the selection of historical precedents with deliberate combinations of ecclesiastical and secular spaces arranged in a chronological order. Elements from the medieval cloisters and from other sites around Europe are incorporated into the structure of the building. The museum features, quote, gardens planted along horticulture information found in medieval treatises and poetry, garden documents and herbals, and medieval works of art such as tapestries, stained glass windows, and column capitals. Approximately 2,000 works of art from medieval Europe, largely dating from the 12th through the 15th century, including exquisite illuminated manuscripts, stained glass, metalwork, enamels, ivories, and tapestries, are exhibited in this unique context. End quote. The majority of the sculptures displayed at the cloisters were acquired by George Gray Bernard, who was an American sculptor and avid collector and dealer of medieval art. Bernard opened his cloisters on Fort Washington Avenue in 1914, and John D. Rockefeller Jr. helped the Met acquire Bernard's cloisters in 1925. Rockefeller Jr. also donated the land and helped finance the conversion of the 56 acres that would become Fort Tryon Park. Rockefeller Jr. also contributed works of art from his own collection, including the Unicord tapestries, established an endowment for operation and future acquisitions, and donated an additional 700 acres in the New Jersey Palisades Plateau to preserve the scenic view from the Met Cloisters. The Fort Tryon Cloisters building was designed by Charles Collins, who had also designed Riverside Church with Harry C. Pelton. John Breck and James D. Rohrmeyer, who both worked for the Met, were placed in charge of the museum's design and construction, and worked together to create a clear and logical flow through the galleries from the Romanesque period to the Gothic period. The cloisters opened to the public on May 10, 1938, and major improvements and renovations have included to this day.